meeting to order and continue on clause by clause on Bill C-15. We're at clause 212, and the motion that will be coming forward will be NDP 12. 13. NDP 13? Did we deal with NDP 12?
Yeah, it was dealt with under NDP 11.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Caron, NDP 13. That's where we are.
Ça, j'avais déjà débattu 12 en même temps.
We'd already debated 12 at the same time as 11. So the three amendments are on the same clause. We know that in the bill, changes to employment insurance make it possible to add 5 weeks to the benefit period for 12 regions selected that meet a number of criteria which I consider arbitrary. Unemployment has to go up by 2 percentage points over a period of 3 months without there necessarily being any signs of economic renewal in the regions. I was surprised by the minister's answers yesterday when we asked him the question, because even though we know that now 3 regions will be added, 4 others will also qualify within a month, but will not be able to receive those additional benefits. So I believe that makes the government decision somewhat arbitrary. I'll go one by one, since the Amendment 13 that we suggest is removing discrimination by adding all the regions in Quebec and Canada that would qualify. So these 5 extra weeks would be available for all of Canada. We believe those extra benefits should be available regardless of what region of Canada one lives in.
This would impose an additional charge on the public treasury, and therefore I have to rule it inadmissible. I will read, because we're in a new meeting, the section of the House of Commons Procedure and Practice section addition. It states in pages 767, 768. Quote, since an amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, it is inadmissible if it imposes a charge on the public treasury, or if it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in the royal recommendation, end of quote. So there's this amendment would increase the number of eligible claimants, which would impose an additional charge on the public treasury. Therefore, I would rule it inadmissible. On BQ7. Oops.
C'était l'une de mes propositions.
Thank you. This was one of my recommendations, but I have 3 amendments and they're different. If the first is defeated, I'd like to talk about the second.
So that's why, Mr. Caron.
Vous avez raison.
And we'll come back to NDP 14 and NDP 15. BQ 7 is being moved by Mr. Marcel. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. BQ 7 seeks to extend the list of regions and to open it up to regions in the bill. Unfortunately, the regions are only oil-producing regions, but the whole sector, the whole natural resources sector is slowing down. Things aren't any better in BTB or the North Shore, so it's not just the oil and gas sector. There are as many issues in the aerospace industry in my region. So this amendment would open up the list which has been closed and add regions as necessary, not only regions that are outside Quebec.
The same ruling applies, quite close to the same ruling as applies to NDP 13. Amendment BQ7 would grant the minister the power to extend the number of regions. And in my opinion, the amendment diverges for the current conditions of the royal recommendation in a way that could increase the number of eligible claimants, which would impose additional charge on the public treasury. Therefore, I would rule that the amendment is inadmissible. NDP 14.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I have often said, this 5-week extension of employment insurance benefits was available as part of a pilot project abolished by the Conservatives in 2011 or 12 and was targeted primarily regions that had seasonal employment. Thus, the amendment proposed, over and above the 12 regions put forward by the government, also provides for regions that did receive benefits under the pilot project: Magdalen Islands, Central Quebec, Trois-Rivières, Northwestern Quebec, Lower St. Lawrence North Shore, Chicoutimi-Jonquière, Eastern Nova Scotia, Western Nova Scotia, Madawaska, Charlotte, Restigouche, Chalbert, and Southern BC, Charlottetown, PEI, St. John's, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories.
The same, I would reject the amendment basically on the same rules, a little different. Amendment NDP 14 attempts to extend the number of regions, and so in the opinion of the chair, the amendment would increase the number of eligible claimants, which would impose an additional charge in the public treasury. Therefore, this amendment is inadmissible. NDP 15.
Celui-là, vous ne pourrez pas le rejeter, Monsieur le Président, parce que
This one can't be declared inadmissible.
mes deux précédents efforts ont échoué. J'y vais pour une troisième tentative.
I'm taking a third shot at this. If we take the very strict definition given by the government on what makes a region eligible for the 5-week EI benefit extension period, 3 regions that qualify now in accordance with the government's criteria: Southern Interior British Columbia, Southern Saskatchewan, and the region of Edmonton. I would point out that the Prime Minister himself on May 13th announced publicly that these 3 regions would be covered by the provisions qualifying regions for extension of benefits. We have the bill. The government made a promise. We have a bill that can make that promise reality. So we would like these 3 regions to be added to the 12 provided for under the bill.
Applies, Mr. Caron. I mean, you are adding regions, so it is likely going to impose an additional charge in the public treasury, and I know you wouldn't want that, so I would have to rule the amendment as inadmissible. Go ahead.
Juste une question par rapport à ça. Si le gouvernement a déjà annoncé
One question, Mr. Chairman. If the government has announced, since the government announced that it was going to be doing this, and if we were to vote on a non-amended bill, how are these 3 regions going to be covered if it was the government's intent to cover them, and if it did announce it would be covering them?
Here who can answer that question. A cabinet decision is a different matter than a piece of legislation. And I think, as the minister announced last night, they are bringing in 3 additional regions where the 2% increase exists, but 2% increase in unemployment over 3 months. Mr. Leipert wants in, but in terms of this committee, the royal recommendation only relates to the bill in question. The matter you raise is something that certainly can be raised with the with the minister, Mr. Lippert. They're having a discussion at the back of the room. We'll see if we can get some officials, but Mr. Lippert will continue on in the meantime.
It's just a general comment in that to follow on what Mr. Caron is proposing and what is, it is frustrating as a member of Parliament on this committee that is supposed to be doing due diligence on a bill that the Prime Minister can go out on his own, make an announcement that effectively changes the bill that we haven't even got through committee yet. And I don't understand, first of all, in this particular bill, why we are being region-specific and why those terms aren't part of regulations versus the bill. And then we have things being changed on the fly, as I say, before the committees even have a chance to go through the bill. It frankly almost makes a sham of the process, Mr. Chairman.
Any other, Mr. Caron? I said, Mr. Champagne, do you have anything to add?
I'll listen to Mr. Caron first.
Okay. Let's hear it. Mr. Caron.
En fait, la question...
In fact, the question was a genuine one, and I'd like an answer. Why are we legislating these 12 regions? Then an announcement is made to add 3 regions that qualify under its criteria, but we don't add the 3 to the bill, these 3 to the bill. I really don't understand, and that's why I'd like to have some answer from an official.
And any officials add?
We can have an official. I think they'll provide the answer to that. We can have an official testify about the process and the royal recommendation that needs to come first before that can be amended. But they provide the technical answer. It's a technical issue, Mr. Chair.
I believe.
That's right, sir.
Director General Employment Insurance Policy Skills Employment Branch. Have you heard the discussion?
I have, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. La réponse que j'offre est que
The answer is that this change requires a royal recommendation.
until that has been established, that's the timing issue that would prevent it from being considered now. I mean, it's somewhat a parliamentary issue as much as a substantive policy issue, but that would be the sequencing that is missing at this point.
En fait, j'aimerais poser la question que M. Lippert a posée, qui est tout à fait pertinente.
I'd like to ask Mr. Niepert's question, which is relevant. Why were the regions identified in the legislation when the fact that there are criteria in the legislation dictate which regions are eligible, and from month to month, different regions might qualify, and we'd need to keep amending the bill constantly? With all due respect to the parliamentary secretary, I'd like to hear the official respond. It's a very simple question. Why is this in the bill rather than in the regulations? Why are those regions set out in the bill and not in the regulations? Since the regions are selected on the basis of criteria which the government has established, those regions might change constantly, so the bill would have to be amended constantly. Why aren't the regions in the regulations?
Discussion yesterday in terms of both the structure of the policy, which starts benefit access in January of 2015 on a reach-back basis, in which case the further that we move from that base period, it makes the policy intent much less applicable to this policy measure. The second issue, as discussed yesterday, was the definition of sudden being based in that period, the reference period of December 2014 to February of 2015 is part of the definition that becomes less pertinent the further we go in time from that base period. There is a commitment to continue to study how this measure plays forward. so as to inform permanent changes to the program, as you may be suggesting, but this particular definition has both a policy rationale that's structured around that time period, as well as the definition of sudden that reflects that.
Mr. Caron, I don't want to go down this road too far. I have ruled, based on the legislation, that this does require a royal recommendation. It does go somewhat to your point, whether or not these measures should be part of a budget bill or a separate bill. I will grant you that. So we'll take a couple of more comments, but we've already ruled. Go ahead, ask your question. Mr. Leipert wants in.
J'ai une autre question, une dernière question supplémentaire.
I have another question, if I might. If the government plans to add South Interior British Columbia and the region of Edmonton, would that not also require another bill to amend what we are amending today, which is the Budget Implementation Act? We have 12 regions in the bill. We want to add 3. So the legislation on which we're voting now would need a royal recommendation to add the other 3 regions.
New regions that have come in, have they hit the 2% threshold? Isn't the criteria in this bill that if you have an increase of 2% of unemployment over a 3-month period, then that brings the region in? Am I wrong or correct on that? Mr. Champagne?
I said indeed. I said indeed.
Oh, indeed, okay. Ms. Ryan?
You're right, Mr. Chair. That is the criteria by which the list is selected, but the structure of the legislation is to name the listed regions, as in the past we have done with any number of pilot projects that did provide benefits on a regional basis. That has an administrative logic as well as the policy intent logic of basing the list of regions in the time that lines up with the commodity decline.
Mr. Leipert?
I want to get a little clarification on past budgets. Would it have been common practice in past budgets to actually name regions, or would the budget have contained the criteria, and if you, as the chair said, fell under or met that criteria, then you qualify? But has it been past practice to actually specifically name regions, or is this something that is new to this budget?
Okay. Mr. Chair.
Ms. Ryan, go ahead.
So it's a little bit of a complex answer to your question. There is a well-established practice within the employment insurance program to introduce policy changes via pilot projects that follow a list of named regions. So this has been the case in the past with any number of measures, regional pilots we call them. This authority still exists within the EI Act and regulations. The difficulty of using that power in this case is that essentially we cannot provide benefits retroactively, or more specifically retrospectively, via regulations. That's a legislative power that we have to follow if we, in fact, want to have benefits start in a timing that coincides with the labor market implications of the commodities downturn. So essentially, if we wanted to go back and help people that started to be affected as of January 2015, we need to do it via legislation rather than regulation.
But would you admit that you could have done it by criteria in the legislation and not have been region-specific?
That would be a very different policy mechanism that would be difficult to implement for our administrative folks. The amount of systems changes and operational changes that are involved are really quite considerable, and that's been one of the core principles of why lists are typically preferred in these approaches rather than a moving trigger, which is built into our program through the variable entrance requirements, but requires a very deep and profound approach administratively, so that you have quite a large system that adjusts in real time, and that's beyond the sort of the policy intent of a response to this specific downturn.
We'll take one more comment and then we'll let it move on, Mr. Library.
Right. I just want to get clarity. We are then right now talking about the particular clause because you rejected the amendment. So we are in a situation of having to vote for or against a clause that we know is wrong. In practice, because we've been told we're going to add regions to it, and we're being asked to vote on a clause that the government has already publicly said is outdated.
Do you have a comment, Mr.?
I just say, Mr. Chair, you've brought the motion. We've provided feedback and explanation. I think everything that has to be said has been said on this.
This is going to be the very final comment because we are into a debate, but I think it's a good discussion, Mr. Caron.
Mais en fait, je suis d'accord pour dire que c'est une bonne discussion. C'est pas.
We've had the information by Ms. Ryan, and we appreciate it, but that doesn't answer the question. Mr. Liepert is right. At present, we're being asked to approve a clause that is now incomplete because of what the government intends to do. The government's intent is to have 15 regions, not 12, but this bill is obliging us to vote on a list that contains 12 regions. So I think this is perfectly relevant and adds to the confusion surrounding this article. It also adds to the arbitrary nature of the government's decision in this regard.
Were you going to add a point there?
Sir, I think it comes back to the sequence of an amendment requires a royal recommendation. There isn't one at this time, so the staging doesn't follow that sequence.
We're actually talking about the clause now that the amendment has been moved out of order.
Okay.
The question is the clause itself isn't complete now.
Mr. Liepert, did you have anything further?
Well, I guess you could reconsider the amendment.
It doesn't meet the royal rec. I mean, that's the reality. It doesn't meet the royal recommendation. Thank you, Ms. Ryan. Okay, clause 212. Shall clause 212 carry? Do you want a recorded vote or are you on division?
Mm-hmm. On the 12? No,
recorded vote, Madam Chair, Madam Clerk.
Mr. McKinnon.
On whether clause 212 carries without amendment.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Cervera?
I said yes.
Ms. O'Connell?
Yes.
Ms. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Winnett?
Yes.
Ms. Ray?
No.
Mr. McColman?
No.
Mr. Liepert?
No.
Mr. Caron?
Oui.
So the clause carries unamended. Clause 213. Shall it carry on division? There's new clause 213.1 BQ8. Mr. Marcel. Merci. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. BQ8. The purpose of the amendment is to change the rate of weekly benefits to 60% of weekly insurable earnings. This would enable people who are unemployed to meet essential needs. I think everybody agrees that people receiving employment insurance aren't necessarily going to be buying televisions and travel. They are heating their homes and they are feeding their children. 55% of income is not a lot of money. It's very hard to make ends meet, and that is why we are moving Amendment B8.
I would rule this amendment out of order. BQ8, similar to many of the others in this section, seeks to increase benefits set out in Section 14 of the Employment Insurance Act. I'll not read the clause of the House of Commons Procedure and Practice, second edition, but it's inadmissible because the amendment would impose a charge on the public treasury, and therefore it's out of order. I'd have to rule it inadmissible. Clause 213(1) BQ9.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le BQ9, l'amendement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. BQ9. The purpose of this amendment, we must never forget that the Employment Insurance Fund is paid into by employers and by employees and employers, not by the Crown or the government. So there are no additional costs as such because the government isn't going to be paying for it. What BQ9 does is, instead of taking the last 12 weeks, we take the 12 best weeks. This means that an employee who has sacrificed working conditions in order to keep his plant open, for example, or sacrificed some pay or sacrificed benefits, doesn't end up being stuck with the last 12 weeks of pay once the plant closes, because he will already have taken a pay cut. He would thus be doubly penalized. So by taking the best 12 weeks, this would be much more advantageous for workers. And let's not forget that the government isn't putting 1 cent into the EI fund. All it's doing is dipping into it to balance its budgets.
This BQ9 does seek to increase benefits set out in Section 17 of the Employment Insurance Act, and in the opinion of the Chair, the amendment would impose an additional charge on the public treasury. Therefore, I would rule the amendment is inadmissible. Before I turn to 214, we've been dealing with employment insurance a fair bit on a lot of amendments, and I would just say to the Department of Finance that in future budgets, if something applies to other areas, I'm not saying this is an omnibus bill, but I would pass on a message to the Department of Finance. If there's other committees should look at some sections of such a bill, it might be wise to send them there instead of asking this committee to deal with employment insurance measures, which as a committee is not our point of expertise. So I just say that in fairness. I'm not saying it's an omnibus bill, but I think it's a valid point. On clause 214, there's no amendments to from 214 to 221. Is there any points anybody wants to raise? Any points, Ms. Raitt, Coleman, Leeper, Tarrant, any points anybody wants to raise on 214 to 221 before we call the question? Okay, shall clauses 214 to 221 carry? On division. 222, BQ10. Is anybody here from the BQ? I guess. They are deemed moved. They're deemed moved. Nobody's here to speak on them. On BQ10 and the consequential amendment BQ12, they seek to increase the benefits set out in the Employment Insurance Act. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice, second edition states on page 768, quote, since the amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, it is inadmissible if it imposes a charge in the public treasury or if it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in the royal recommendation, end of quote. Therefore, I would rule the amendment would impose an additional charge on the public treasury. Therefore, it's inadmissible. 222 clause 222 carry. On division, BQ 11 the BQ 11. It's deemed moved. It's exactly the same ruling as applied a moment ago on BQ 10. So I would rule it's inadmissible, as well as BQ 13. Shall clause 223 carry? On division. 224. Shall clause 224 carry?
On division.
On division. PV5, Ms. May. Oops.
And I apologize, Mr. Chair, that I wasn't here when the part of year 3 and 4 were put forward. I was at a meeting on HIV/AIDS, and I had to decide. I didn't know that my amendments had much of a chance if I was here to plead for them in any event. But can I speak to PV5, or is it precluded by the earlier defeats?
I think it was precluded by the earlier defeat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Pardon? No.
You ruled it not.
We ruled it an amendment that it wasn't admissible.
Right.
Under
so
PV.
No discussion.
There was no discussion. And the previous ruling applied to PV5 as well.
Clarification. I'd been misinformed that it was defeated. Thank you for letting me know it was ruled out of order.
It's just ruled out of order. Clause 225 carry? On division? There's no amendments to 226 to 238. Is there any points anybody wants to raise, or Mr. Ouellette?
232, the Canadian Marine Act. I know they came to talk about it.
Just hold on. What we'll do is we'll deal with. You want to raise a point on 232?
Yeah.
So shall clauses 226 to 231 carry? On division? On division, Mr. Ouellette, 232. You want to make a point?
I just want to make the point that
what's
12 et 13 ont été déclarés hors d'ordre aussi parce qu'ils font partie.
What about 12 and 13 as well, because they're part of the annex? I don't know. Sorry, BQ 12 and 13. We'll have to deal with them. Thank you.
Mr. Ouellette, the floor is yours now.
I just want to make the point that I don't think that the Canadian Marine Act should be modified in this way. At the end of the day, I think this is something that they should look. It's a kind of an aberration. I understand why they do it, because they need to go quickly for the 150th anniversary, but I'm not sure that the Port of Vancouver should be heading up these celebrations. I think there's probably more appropriate organizations within Vancouver that can do that, and they do look at what is the primary function of these organizations in the long term, so that they maintain their mission statement and what it is they're looking for, because frankly, the Marine Act, I'm not sure it's the best place to be having legislation for the 150th anniversary of Canada. That's just my point that I'd like to make, and I hope the officials hear about it. Thank you.
Okay. Clause 232, shall it carry? On division?
Division.
On division. Clauses 233 to 238.
I was thinking of it.
Shall they carry? On division? Okay, we didn't have any clauses stood. Schedule 1. BQ 12 and 13, Rev. Pardon?
4 titles next.
No, Schedule 1. We had to deal with Schedule 1. Shall the Schedule 1 is at the back of the bill. Shall the schedule carry? On division? Schedule 2, shall Schedule 2 carry?
Division.
On division. The short title, which is what? entitled Budget Implementation Act 2016, number 1. Shall Clause 1 carry?
Division.
As on division? The title, what do we do with that? Carry?
Division.
On division.
On division. Shall the bill carry as amended?
On division.
On division. Shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House? On division.
Yep.
And shall the committee order a reprint of the bill?
Agreed.
How many copies?
Pardon?
How many copies?
How many copies? Does anybody, what's the normal tradition?
It's needed because we made it.
Yes, it is needed because we made an amendment. There was one amendment. Many attempted, one made. Shall the, so the committee, we're agreed that the committee shall order a reprint of the bill. I believe that completes the bill before midnight. Is there anything else?
Well,
sorry.
Well, not on this, but before you adjourn.
Yeah, okay. There's nothing else on the bill? Okay, you want to raise a point before we adjourn?
All I wanted to ask is, are we meeting Thursday?
I don't believe we are. We haven't got anything on the agenda for Thursday, and I think we had last night and today. So I don't see the need, but the staff are trying to work on a schedule, a proposed schedule for the fall for the pre-budget hearings, and we were talking about it earlier, and maybe we could raise the point now. We were wondering where should the committee go in BC and in Alberta and in Quebec if we don't go to the usual. It was suggested at the subcommittee discussion that we would try and do the 10 provinces. And I believe Ms. Wright, just for the staff to determine what the costs would be, what the schedule would be, etc., as a preliminary for the committee to look at. I think Ms. Wright suggested Kelowna and BC. Where would it be possible in Alberta, outside of Calgary and Edmonton? It was you who suggested, Ron, that could we go somewhere else in Alberta than the usual, and where might it be, Mr. Caron, in Quebec? Just for suggestion at this stage. We'll have to make a formal plan a little later. Any thoughts, Mr. Caron, then Mr. Lippert?
Je suis pas opposé à l'idée de visiter des villes.
I'm not opposed to the idea of visiting other cities than the usual ones or smaller communities, but in general, I think before taking those decisions, we should know where the memoirs or briefs we'll be receiving are coming from. Because in Alberta, for example, we have a significant number of submissions that come from Calgary and Edmonton, so it would be reasonable to go to Red Deer, that's halfway. But I think it really depends on where the briefs that we are keeping or receiving that are coming from, the witnesses that we want to hear from, and that we probably won't know before the month of August. So I don't know if this is a situation that we can postpone until we return in September, at which point we'll have more information on the provenance of those briefs.
And all that kind of stuff, and the travel and what weeks they would be, so we could name Montreal, or where is the committee traditionally gone in Quebec?
À vrai dire, le comité n'a pas voyagé à ma connaissance depuis 2011.
Well, to my knowledge, the committee hasn't traveled since 2011. Since that time, we've met just in Ottawa, and submissions have been made by video conference. So I wasn't on the committee in 2011. It'll be a new experience for all of us. Well, I think Montreal is often a city that we want to visit, and I would be in favor of doing that. Quebec City as well, in my opinion. But like Red Deer, there would also be the option of Trois-Rivières, I don't know if there are any people on our side who are familiar with Trois-Rivières, but Trois-Rivières or even Drummondville would be a logical halfway point.
Montreal, Mr. Leipert, you were coming in.
I was just going to suggest that after I made the comments about Red Deer, there was a point well made that we want to spend as little time as we have to on the road getting to places. Red Deer's not that easy to get to. Let me give it some thought relative to whether it would be Calgary, Edmonton, but I'd reconsider on that. And for costing purposes, it won't matter whether it's Calgary or Edmonton, so just cost one or the other in there, but I'll give some thought as to whether it makes sense to go to one versus the other.
Just, we are hearing from the PBO on June 9th, which is next Tuesday. Next Thursday. On Mr. McColman's motion, does the committee also want to hear from the PO? This is a question from the PBO. To discuss the cost estimates for the bills that were just, the estimates were released yesterday or today on C239 and C241, or do we want to hear in the costs on those or not?
Sure.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Witnesses for the CRA and the KPMG continuing study have been invited for Tuesday, June 7th. So that you look...
CRA or CPA?
CPA. CPA.
Okay.
The study's called CRA.
Yeah, the study's called CRA, but one of the witnesses will be CPA.
Est-ce qu'on pourrait, vu que le directeur parlementaire du budget est...
Since the PBO is in Ottawa regularly, and since we want to indeed move forward with the ARC study, could we perhaps reverse those and give us more time to gather the witnesses and make sure they're all there?
The parliamentary budget officer, which would work better for him and his staff, and he's indicated that Thursday would work best, so we best stick with that. Okay, then until Tuesday, meeting adjourned.